Okay, so now that we know how to multiply polynomials, it's literally term by term multiplication. All right. It turns out that when we look at binomials times binomials, some situations occur. So let's take a look at the first one, and then we'll just slowly build some other unique situations about binomials times binomials. So let's start this off by taking a look at the binomial x plus 2 times the binomial x plus 3. Now, if we go through the term by term, right, I'm basically going to take the first term, right, x times x, and we're going to get an x squared. As a matter of fact, since I went first times first, I'm going to label that pathway as pathway f, and I'm going to label this term as the term f because it was created by taking the first term times the first term. Right? And then, of course, not only do I have to multiply the x to the x, but I also have to multiply the x to that 3. So an x times 3 will give us a positive 3x. And if you take a look, right, those two terms are on the outside. So I'll label that pathway O, and as a matter of fact, I'll label that product as O. All right, and so we've exhausted the term by multiplication of x. So now we move over to the 2. So the 2 would need to be multiplied to the 2x. That would give us a positive 2x. Well, if these two terms are the outer, these two terms are now the inner. So I'll label that as I. And then, of course, the last thing to do is to distribute the 2 to the 3. That would give us a positive 6. And I'll label that pathway L. So that got a little messy, but the overall idea is what we have is famously known as FOIL. It's basically the name we give for the term-by-term multiplication of a binomial times a binomial. And cleaning this up, right, we get x squared plus 5x plus 6 is our final result. But the idea is we do my first term, my outer terms, my inner terms, and my last terms. Term-by-term multiplication, but we're given each pathway a name. First times first is first. Outer times outer is outer, inner times inner is inner, last times last is last. And so we kind of have, maybe a shortcut if you would, but it's still essentially term by term multiplication, but that's the name we call it when we're multiplying a by times a by. So that's basically our first unique situation. So let's just use it in some examples. So in the next one, again, if I go FOIL, first times first, right? So my first term is basically a 6x squared. My outer, right, it would be so my outer term would be a positive 10x. My inner term would be a positive 12x. And then our last two terms would be a positive 20. All right, and hence the name FOIL. Cleaning it up, these two terms are like, that would give us a 22x and then plus 20. And so basically there we got it. All right, so we have our term by term multiplication, right? Binomials called FOIL. So let's just keep doing that. Again, term by term, x times x. Well, there's my first. That will result in a 2x squared. When I do my outer, a positive times a negative is a negative, and then 5 times x is 5x. Doing my inners, a negative times a positive is a negative, and we get a negative 6x there. And there's my O and there's my I. Doing my last, a negative times a negative is a positive. 3 times 5 is 15. And so there's my last. First, outer, inner, last. Term by term multiplication. So cleaning this up, these two terms are like. They'll combine up to a negative 11x and plus 15. And there's basically our answer for that binomial times that binomial. And so again, just keep on going, right? So this by times this by, well, first times first. Right, that gives us a 3x squared. The outer will give us a negative 15x. The inner will give us a negative x. And the last would give us a positive 5. So first, outer, inner, last. These two terms are like. So a negative 15x take away x is a combined total of negative 16x. And then plus 5. So FOIL. All right, so next one, I'm just going to go ahead and first times first, there's my 12x squared. My outer results in a negative 32x. My inner is a positive 21x. and then last times last, right? Positive times a negative would give us a negative, and then 7 times 8 is 56. So there's some bigger numbers, but we're still F, O, I, and L. And then these two terms are like, so we have 12x squared. I believe if you take negative 32 and you add 21, I believe you end up with a negative 11x, and then minus 56. And so there's basically the result of that. Probably the only thing I can do to make this harder is to throw fractions at you. But again, it's just term by term multiplication. When I take the first times the first, right, 1/2 times 1/4 is 1/8. X times x is x squared. If you need to see the little multiplications, write them. Now the outer, right, so 1/2 times 1/5, a positive times a positive is a positive. 1/2 times 1/5 is 1/10, and then we have an x. Doing my inner, a positive times a negative is a negative. 2/3 times 1/4 results in a 2/12, and then we have x. And then doing our last, a negative times a positive is a negative. 2/3 times 1/5 results in 2/15. So again, my F, my O, my L, my I, and my L. And then just multiplication is top to tops, bottoms to bottoms. So these two terms are like, all right, and this one actually reduces. So we have 1/8 x squared plus 1/10x, 1/10 x. I think that's going to be a minus 1/6 x and a minus 2/15. So we still have to combine those terms. It comes down to subtracting 1/10 minus 1/6. Again, we need an LCD. I believe it's 30. So I need a 3/3 and a 5/5. We get 3/30 minus 5/30, which is a negative 2/30. Reducing that, 2 goes in itself once, goes in there 15 times. We end up with a negative 1/15. So putting this all together, we have 1/8 x squared minus 1/15 x minus 2/15. Okay, so what we have, again, this is still term by term multiplication, but when we do it the by times a by, it has this nice little name of a FOIL, because we're literally multiplying first to first, outer to outer, inner to inner, last to last, and then combining like terms. So that's our first special situation. We'll take a look at another special situation in the next video. Well done. See you guys then.